Welcome back. South Africa could find itself facing a shortage of fuel. That's if the Moerane Report recommendations are not implemented. The Moerane Commission recommended that a 90-day stock of fuel be kept aside. The recommendations were made in 2006 and were never implemented. For more on this, let's talk to Peter Morgan, CEO of Liquid Fuels Wholesalers Association. Peter, thank you so much for your time this evening. Can you tell us why the recommendations haven't been implemented since 2006?
Well, we've been told why they haven't, and it's a very short and sweet answer. It's because there's a cost of keeping strategic stocks, and when the discussion was started many years ago between the oil industry and government, they could never get to a grounding on who was going to pay and how much they were going to pay. So that's why it stalled.
Do you buy into that reasoning?
You know, we understand that reason, but I think the big issue here is that why it's so important that we should have these strategic stocks. And would it be okay if I went through that very quickly?
Absolutely.
You see, what we know is that we've gone from an economy where we had refineries that were producing our products, majority of the product, and we've now moved to an environment where it's all about importing of the finished product itself and not refining. And this importing of finished product actually brings with it an increased risk that we didn't used to have when it came to refining. And those increased risks are very easy to understand. Because we're about between 3 and 6 weeks of this product on the water, depending on where we import it from, what you find is that sometimes a product arrives and it's off spec, so it needs to be clean. Sometimes you find that there's delays in shipping to get it here. And even we have situations where the vessels arrive in time, but because of bad weather on the coast, they can't be discharged in time. What we've come to learn over the last number of years is that when there's a delay in importation time, or for whatever reason, that the oil majors keep the product that they need for their own customers. And the first thing they do is that they then ration the independent wholesalers. So effectively, because of the averaging that we have in our pricing model at the moment, what they're doing is they're saying that if you're in an urban area where they operate, then you'll be fine. However, if you're in a non-urban area, and that's where all the independent wholesalers operate, then you will continually to be in a situation where you're going to have rationing of the independent wholesalers, which means that often this is passed down to the end customer.
I can only think of the impact of people in sort of smaller towns, more rural settings, and agriculture comes to mind immediately. What is the knock-on effect? What would the knock-on effect be on our economy and on these producers specifically, should there be a major delay, like, for instance, the strike we've seen recently at Transnet? That didn't affect us badly, but in a future setting it could do.
Yeah, you see, if we had strategic stocks, and let's say whether it's 30 days, 60 days, or 90 days, it's not the big issue. If we had 30 days strategic stocks in the right place, and we have a situation at the ports where there's a strike, then all you do is you take product from the strategic stock, put it into the market, and when the situation clears itself, you put the strategic stock back again. So that's the first issue. But there's a couple of other issues that are concerning us. If we talk about there's an average in the current pricing methodology, and there's an important issue behind this average. If you look at urban areas where there's large volumes, big depots, and very short transportation cycles that come from those big depots, it's a lot cheaper because of the economies of scale. But if you're in a small outlying area and you have a small depot, and from that depot you have very long transport delivery areas that come from it. So because it's nothing to do with the efficiency of the operator, but because you're in an outlying area and the depot is small and the transport distances are long, you have a much bigger cost to carry. than if you're in a big urban area. Our current pricing methodology takes these two differences and averages them out. So we have the oil companies operating in urban areas where there's an over-recovery in the pricing methodology, and the reverse for the independent wholesalers. The oil industry sold off or walked away from all the business that they had in these non-urban areas, and they've called that transformation. So what we have here is we have a situation where it's the new entrants, the transformed businesses, that are the ones that are being put under extreme pressure when it comes to rationing. Our business, as strange as it sounds, it also uses diesel to run itself. And if you look at what the diesel price has done this year, we've had massive increases in the diesel price, and none of that is recognized in the current pricing methodology. But at the same time, we had a situation in May this year, when the current cost recoveries in getting the product from the coast inland was actually reduced by government because they were given the wrong information and used it. So what we have is we have almost a perfect storm that's arrived in the non-urban areas. And we can no longer guarantee security of supply because all these things are starting to happen together. And why we use the term fuel shedding is because if you look at what happens with electricity, with water, and those of us that are getting quite used to having water restrictions, you'll see that when this discussion starts, it starts in the periphery, and you start to find vibrations in the periphery. And it seems to be a long way from anything drastic. And then all of a sudden, this periphery moves towards the center, and it collapses very quickly. So what we're saying now is that we need some good leadership that understands where this industry is, understands the plight of the new entrants, that understands how the pricing methodology works, that understands we need strategic stocks now. Otherwise, this movement from the periphery into the center is going to happen very quickly if we don't start acting now.
So we've seen a number of things, like you say, you've described it as the perfect storm, a number of factors coming together right now. So some people would say, since 2006, these recommendations haven't been implemented. What's the rush now? But as you said, there are a number of things that have been happening internationally. Russia's invasion of the Ukraine, pushing all the prices up. But I want to talk specifically also about the change from refining our own oil. And we know we had certain crude oil stocks. Recently, to try and subsidize the price of petrol and diesel, the government sold off some of those crude oil stocks, and we don't know what the reserves look like. Is that also concerning?
You see, I've been told that they sold those off, but actually bought them back again. But you raise a very important point. In the past, we had about 30 days of crude oil strategic reserves in one place in Saldanha Bay. Now that strategic reserve for crude oil in Saldanha Bay had a pipeline that went into the refinery in Cape Town. So even if you've got that crude oil reserve, it's no good if the refinery in Cape Town is not refining. And at the moment, that's not the case. That's why, and there's another issue, that if you look at refining, the business model behind refining is you run it at 100% or 99% if you can. You keep a refinery as busy and as efficient as possible. But when you look at importing, as we see now, we see the whole issue of just-in-time importing comes about. So the oil majors are importing only what they need at the last possible moment that they need it, because they're facing their own challenges when it comes to shareholders' expectations and things like that. And that's why the slightest issue now when it comes to importing a finished product, we don't even have a few days of strategic stocks like we used to have, because the refineries were being kept so efficient. So and you're right, it's about what's happening globally. It's also about what's happening locally, and they're all actually linked together. Because if you look at the chain of getting product to the country, it starts with buying it, it goes to shipping, and it ends up actually at a commercial customer on a retail forecourt. But if you choke it somewhere in the chain, in the value chain, you often have a spin-off effects upwards and downwards from wherever you do it. So we need people, and we need those in power, we need the regulator to understand the criticalness of the situation we find ourselves in now. And it's got to be looked at from the beginning to the end of the value chain. You can't just look at one small piece of it.
Let's hypothesize and say that the powers that be don't listen to this message. They ignore all the circumstances, the picture that you're painting. It continues as it is, and we do end up in a difficult situation where we are short of stocks. What would that fuel shedding look like for ordinary citizens in South Africa, whether they be in urban areas or in more far-flung, remote areas?
You see, it's going to start in the far-flung, remote areas, because it's those areas that have the error that was made in the zone differentials this year. It's those areas that do far more distribution per customer, per litre, so to speak. So the increases in those have a much bigger and a much quicker detrimental effect. A very wise man said to me a little while ago, how does a business go bankrupt? And I said, how does it go bankrupt? And he said it goes bankrupt slowly, very fast. And that's what's worrying us, is that we're in that situation now where we're going bankrupt slowly, and it's going to become bankrupt very fast by the end of the year unless something drastic has changed.
Just lastly, before I let you go, are there any indications that the regulator and the other powers that be are looking at the situation to try and come to a solution?
But we've had discussions, and we've had some promises made to us, but we seem to be losing action at the moment, and nothing is happening. And the pressure is building up day upon day. Something's got to start happening right now.
Well, thank you very much. Certainly a bleak picture. Peter Morgan, CEO of Liquid Fuels Wholesalers Association, talking to us about the very real possibility of fuel shedding if we do not build up some kind of stocks of fuel in the country.